Stop. Friendly fire. Author. Toyka. Toykar. Chapter Prologue. This trade is a draw. Now, let's clear things up. The woman put down the tobacco pipe she had been gently biting down on, puffed out the smoke, and licked her lips. She was a beautiful woman with striking red, wavy hair, but more importantly was the fact that she was a god. So, what you desire is an immortal body and infinite growth potential? Yes. Nope, not possible. Go back. Don't be like that. The man, a 27-year-old man called Shin Woo, sat opposite from the woman, separated by an antique desk. He was an ordinary office worker who liked fantasy novels and games. Well, at least until he died. And now that he died, he was a hero that had been chosen by a god. Probably. I heard that I still had a long life ahead of me, yet I died prematurely. Shouldn't I receive at least this much from a god since I died so unfairly? Geez, the novels these days have really spoilt these kids' backbone. Before, if I told them they were getting a second chance, they would go, yippee, or yell, call. Well, people change as the times go by. Though God wanted to hit Shin Woo, who had nonchalantly nodded his head and replied to her, she restrained herself. After all, it was none other than her who had gathered the souls of those who had died unfairly, because she needed their help. If he was from my world, then I would have just. She was certainly a god, but she wasn't the god of Earth. She was the god who reigned over Haguroa, which differed in culture, history, size, and every other aspect from Earth. Then why was she in a situation where she had to bring souls from another world? There was a truly sad, tear-jerking reason behind that. Anyhow, those guys sure are cold-hearted. Their god is saying that she'll get herself involved and clean up their mess, but they're just avoiding it since they don't want to die. There were a lot of heroes who accepted my revelation, you know. They all just died in Haida. Shin Woo instinctively gulped and asked God, "Is the place that dangerous?" Of course, it is. God couldn't hide her bitterness and responded for a second time, putting the tobacco pipe back into her mouth. If she didn't at least do that, she felt like she would have sighed in front of a human. This was a story that happened several decades ago. Haida, a great empire that thrived in the undergrounds of Haguroa, was met with tragedy. Their emperor, Jizahanu, dreamt of immortality and researched forbidden black magic, but as a consequence of his recklessness, the entire underground empire received an undead curse. What's worse, the curse would spread gradually, and if left unchecked, would devour the entire world. God, recognizing the severity of the situation, passed down a divine revelation to all humans and promised that she would grant a wish to the savior of the empire. There were many heroic men who came forward, but all of them failed. The curse deeply rooted in the empire was strong, and the heroes who headed underground in order to save the empire couldn't overcome the curse, degenerating into the undead and becoming a part of the undead empire. Only after did God decide to exhibit her power more extensively. She scattered and planted her power across the empire, encouraging the heroes, but it didn't help. The influence of the empire, which sought to lead all life to undeath, gradually increased and devoured half of the continent. And that's when God, unable to endure any further, decided that she had to stop the empire, even if it meant dragging heroes from other worlds. Shin Woo was also one of them. Still, an immortal body is impossible. Ask for something else. Then please give me something similar. Listen, kid. God raised her tobacco pipe and pointed at Shin Woo's shabby soul as she explained. Tremendous power burdens the owner. An immortal body? Infinite growth potential? You won't be able to handle such power, and you'll just explode and die. So, go on and offer more realistic and fitting conditions. But with a realistic and fitting power, I'll probably end up like my seniors, dying without being able to do anything. At that moment, the human's words thrust deep into the god's heart. Right now, Shin Woo was practically declaring to the god that her struggles were meaningless. Why should I hear this from a mere hero candidate? Should I just kill him? God momentarily felt the impulse to do just that, but changed her mind upon seeing the human's challenging expression. This kid would have to go through hell before he could even understand her a little. All right, I'll do as you ask. Yeah. Of course, a perfect immortal body is impossible. You won't die ordinarily, but you'll still die in deadly situations. What about the infinite growth potential? That's also up to you, but I'll make it so it's theoretically possible. Oh. In exchange, God flicked her tobacco pipe, and ash flew through the air. You'll lose something very important. Your normal, physical body can't accept that power. What exactly is that important thing? I'm not going to become impotent, or become bald, am I? This is the best I can do. Now, Shin Woo, are you going to do it, or not? She didn't answer his question. He faced God's spiteful, cold eyes, and he briefly felt conflicted, but he ultimately nodded his head and spoke. Even if he were to become impotent, or become bald, there's a time when a man needs to take the risk. All right, I'll do it. Fine, then our contract has been established. God put the pipe into her mouth again, and simultaneously, Shin Woo's body was enveloped in a bright light. Transmission magic that would transport his soul to the Haida Empire had been activated. You'll be sent to the entrance of the Empire. Once you arrive there, I won't be able to help you directly, but I'll send you quests instead. You know what quests are, right? Yes. Good, and when you arrive, remember to check your status first. It's really important that you know who you are. Okay. It seemed as though God had grinned and laughed wickedly when she put the tobacco pipe into her mouth, but he was soon shrouded by a bright light and was unable to see anything. In the next moment, the light disappeared, and Shin Woo's body was dumped onto the cold floor. The transfer was done in the blink of an eye. Oof! She could have let me down a little more gently. Who? Shin Woo grumbled softly and stood up. He had been dumped into an enormous underground cave, as expected of an underground empire. There was a passageway on both of his sides, and it felt eerie as if mummies would pop out at any minute from all sides. At least there weren't any enemies nearby. I was ready for this, but this feels really serious. It's cold, too. He felt cold, perhaps because he didn't have any clothes on. He stroked his skin in order to soothe the cold, but he soon realized that something was off. Huh? His body was hard. The hand that had touched his body was also really hard. When he raised his hand to see what was going on, there were bones, rather than a human hand. Huh? Shin Woo was so shocked that he went stiff for a while. He somehow got a hold of himself, and when he moved his hand, the bones naturally bobbed. The 5 fingers composed of bone truly began to dance rhythmically in the air. Ha ha ha. No way. Ha ha. This guy. It was such an unrealistic sight that he laughed automatically. For the first time, Shin Woo bowed his head and observed his body, but his entire body was obviously all bone. The moment he saw that, his mind blanked. What do I do? Is this by any chance God's mistake? Did I perhaps receive the Empire's curse as soon as I arrived, and became an undead? Then, he remembered what God had said before their sudden parting. That's it. Status. She told me to check my status as soon as I arrived. The moment Shin Woo said the word status, as though he had just grabbed onto a final strand of hope, a strange row of text was engraved in the air in front of him. It was similar to what he had often seen in the games when he was alive. Yeah, even the contents written within. Shin Woo. Normal skeleton blessed by God. LV1. Strength 13, Agility 13, Health 13, Magic 3. Passive skills. Invisible Heart LV1. Active skills. Bone Reinforcement LV1. The wind passed by his smooth, bald skull and his empty, impotent crotch. It only took around 10 minutes before Shin Woo figured out that this was neither God's mistake, nor the Empire's curse. Less than Chapter 1. Reinforcement Hero 1 greater than. After he had accepted that he would have to deal with a skeleton body, bald and impotent, from now on, even he thought it was an incredible feat of composure, Shin Woo began to earnestly research his status. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. It was a basic principle to know oneself before entering the battlefield. Though he still lacked the courage to actually seek out his enemies. Shin Woo. Normal skeleton blessed by God. LV1. Strength 13, Agility 13, Health 13, Magic 3. Passive skills. Invisible Heart LV1. Active skills. Bone Reinforcement LV1. I get that I'm a skeleton, but what does this blessing thing mean? As expected, he was most concerned about his class. No matter how he thought about it, this wasn't a blessing, it was a curse. What exactly is the blessing? When he carefully thought about it, a series of text appeared, just like when he had called out the status window. You are a skeleton that was blessed and created by God. As such, you will not take any damage from holy magic and will instead receive 1.5x the normal recovery rate. You are unaffected by curses, as you were blessed by God. Your body is immune to all curses. That's unexpectedly amazing. The ability was truly befitting of the word blessed. It felt like it wouldn't be out of place to replace the term skeleton with the term angel instead. But she shouldn't just made him an angel in the first place then. He thought pointlessly and went over the next item. In some ways, starting at level 1 is natural. And as for my physical abilities or my magic, I don't know the standard here, so it doesn't matter. He skipped past the level and stats and checked his skills, which were a reflection of his negotiations with God. He had 1 passive skill and 1 active skill, and Shin Woo checked the passive skill first. Invisible Heart LV1, Passive. Your heart cannot be seen, nor can it be grabbed. You are immune to mental status ailments, and you will revive even if your body is broken to pieces. Each revival will increase the skill level by 1. Each skill level will increase your stats by 3. However, you will be completely destroyed if the skill reaches the max level, LV100. One of the secrets had been solved. He wondered why he was so composed despite being dumped into a situation like this, and it was all thanks to this skill. However, since it would help him survive in his current situation and wouldn't be detrimental, he accepted the truth quite easily. So, a perfect immortal body is impossible? But with this, did this mean he had 99 lives? Well, it didn't seem like he would die under ordinary circumstances. Moreover, whenever he died, he would gain additional stat bonuses. Isn't this an ability that forces him to accept that he'd become a skeleton? Of course, he didn't know what would happen if his body was broken into several pieces all at once, or if it were possible to die several times at once. He had other questions like those, but since they were questions he couldn't solve right away, he decided that he'd solve those problems later. Rather, it was actually better for it to remain unsolved forever. Bone Reinforcement LV1, Active. Sacrifice a bone, or a piece of bone equipment in order to reinforce your bones or your bone equipment. You can absorb the special experiences and memories within the bone. The higher the level, the more effective the absorption. The last one was the skill that would, theoretically, allow Shin Woo to grow indefinitely. But why didn't he feel inspired when he saw it? There's no way to find out until I get a bone and try it out myself. While thinking that, a series of text suddenly appeared before his eyes. A quest has been generated. Ah, a quest. This was honestly a nice time for a quest since he didn't know where to go. Perhaps the quest had waited for this moment. The contents of the quest were very suitable for him as well. The entrance of the Underground Empire? The place where you have arrived at is the Underground Empire's exterior passageway, where the effects of the curse are almost non-existent. However, the Empire's guards are always patrolling these areas. Whether you exterminate or evade the patrols is up to you, but proceed forward, and find the hideout that possesses God's power. Quest Reward. Minimap. A minimap, huh? He was curious as to what a minimap was like, and the passageway was a one-way road anyway. It wouldn't be bad to find the hideout, and he also didn't really have a reason to ignore the quest either. He was still hostile to the god who made him like this, But since he didn't want to lose out by going astray, Shin Woo decided to follow the contents of the quest for now. But just as he was about to move his body to do so, an undead appeared from far inside the passageway. Patrol. Ling. Are there no heroes anywhere? Luckily, it was a skeleton that looked similar to Shin Woo. However, unlike him, it carried a decent white bone spear, and since it was in an equipped state, it was much better off than him. It was surprising that a skeleton composed of all bones could speak and that he could understand what it was saying, but now wasn't the time to be surprised about that. Skeleton Soldier, LV-1. When he saw its appearance, its class and level appeared right before Shin Woo's eyes. But wait a second. It's only level 1 when it looks like it should at least be level 5? How the hell is that level 1? Voice. Unclear. He had ended up talking aloud due to his shock that the skeleton was only level 1. The skeleton, which was several meters away, instantly turned its head towards him. It noticed him, even though it didn't even have eyes. Skeleton. I haven't seen before. A newbie? In that extremely short moment, Shin Woo thought of countless things. The other side is level 1, and I'm level 1 with high stats, so shouldn't I just fight it, he thought. On the other hand, the other side has a weapon. Wouldn't it be difficult for me, who doesn't know any martial arts, to beat it barehanded? He soon came to a conclusion. Yeah, I'm a newbie. Nice to meet you. A newbie. Huh. Nice to meet you. If the enemy misunderstood and considered him an ally, then there was no need to throw away that advantage. Shin Woo greeted him as brightly and as pleasantly as he could, and slowly approached it. The skeleton soldier also approached him, as if there were no enemies around. Your bones are really clean. Your bones are also sturdy. Thanks. The skeleton soldier seemed happy from the compliment, and with the hand that wasn't holding the spear, rubbed its head while emitting a squeaky sound. When he saw that, Shin Woo's non-existent eyes gleamed. This was his best chance. He quickly extended both of his bone arms and stole its spear. The skeleton panicked as its weapon was snatched in the blink of an eye. What are you doing? It means I'm a newbie hero. Since he had never learned how to use a spear when he was alive, Shin Woo just swung the spear like a club and attacked the skeleton. The moment it hit its bones, his own bones felt a considerable rebound force, and he did his best to not let go of the spear. You traitor! You're with the goddess! Who the hell is with that old hag? He would pay her back later for turning him into this. It just wasn't possible right now. Shin Woo swung the spear, focusing all his rage towards God into it while clenching his teeth. However, the skeleton would scream whenever it was hit by the bone spear, and it surprisingly didn't back away, instead gradually getting closer. Isn't this too hard for someone who's level 1? You traitor! Shin Woo was shocked that the skeleton had so quickly gotten in front of him, and swung the spear with all his might, attacking it. However, the skeleton easily evaded the obvious attack, threw its body at him, and bashed into him. Once Shin Woo was struck by his opponent's decisive blow, he pitifully dropped the spear, and it fell to the floor. Even though he was just bones, no, perhaps because he was just bones, it hurt even more. To make matters worse, when he had somehow managed to stand up, he saw that the skeleton soldier had regained its spear and was pointing it at him. Though the skeleton was cracked in various places due to his attacks, its spirit was no less than that of a death knight. Executing. Traitor. Wait a second, Paul. Remember our good old days. Executing. The skeleton soldier's spear flew towards his skull, crushing it apart. It was a clean attack, compared to Shin Woo's unsightly attack. It was truly a perfect critical hit. Execution complete. Returning to patrol. The skeleton soldier confirmed that Shin Woo's skull had indeed been crushed, and it seemed as though it were sure of his death, as it nodded its head and turned around. However, in the next instant, the broken pieces of Shin Woo's shattered skull emitted a faint light, gathered into one piece, and was restored. Invisible Heart has become level 2. All stats have risen by 3. 98 levels remaining until the max level. Shin Woo regained consciousness in a split second and stood up without a sound. His empty eye sockets momentarily flickered with a faint flame before disappearing. He carefully closed and opened his fist, and then attacked the defenseless and slowly moving skeleton from behind. If he learned anything from his defeat, it was that a skeleton's greatest weakness was their head. Shin Woo didn't even attempt to snatch away the spear this time. He rushed in real close, turned his hands into fists, and pounded on its skull like a madman. Die! Die! Kuak! The skeleton soldier screamed and swung its spear, but they were too close for his spear to be effective. Its spear floundered in the air a few more times, and it soon threw it away, responding with its own fists, but by then, it was already too late. Shin Woo didn't know how many times he had struck its head, but the cracks he'd made thus far suddenly emitted a cracking sound and expanded, shattering the skull. You have hunted a LV-1 skeleton soldier. Even after the message appeared before his eyes, Shin Woo remained on guard, but when he saw that the skeleton soldier was unable to maintain its body any longer and start to break down, he barely released the tension within his body and dropped to the floor. Though an undead body didn't feel fatigue, his mind that barely remained inside was completely groggy. I shouldn't have underestimated him. He was confident that he had done everything he could to prepare. But there had been an unbridgeable gap in skill between him and the skeleton soldier. Its spear had crushed his skull in a single strike, and he had to strike him several times before he could do the same. That difference caused him to die once. I can't help that I've already died once. I just have to not die again. Shin Woo energized his spirit, which had been exhausted by the fierce battle. A mere skeleton soldier was nothing more than the lowest rank monster in the Empire. If he gave up here, he would be nothing. He somehow exerted strength into his bones and stood up. Then, he saw 3 spoils of war that remained where the skeleton had disappeared. One of the remaining items was the white bone spear he had used, another was a black coin, and the last one was a bone that had remained without breaking down. Shin Woo instinctively extended his hand and grabbed them. You have acquired a LV-1 bone spear. You have acquired the skeleton soldier's arm bone. You have acquired 10 perium. Would there really be any need for money in an empire only comprised of the undead, he thought? That was the first question that had come to mind, but then again, he had a leather pouch on him, even though he was just bones. Shin Woo shrugged his shoulders and decided to put the coin into his pouch. Now, the only remaining things of importance were the 2 spoils of war. Bone spear. LV-1. Durability. 93 1/100ths. Attack power. 5 to 15. The bone spear remained sturdy, despite clashing against bone several times during the battle. It had an important detail. There was a level on the item. No. There was more. Would you like to sacrifice the bone spear in order to reinforce your bones? You can choose one of the following to reinforce: toe bone, leg bone, arm bone, a finger bone, upper jaw bone, and the lower jaw bone. No. It seemed as though it was possible for bone equipment to be sacrificed in order to reinforce the body, but he desperately needed a weapon right now, so he let it be. More importantly, there was still something left that could reinforce his bones. Would you like to sacrifice the skeleton soldier's arm bone to reinforce your bones? You can reinforce your arm bone. Shin Woo scanned his surroundings before he nodded his head. The desolate passageway was silent, without even the sound of ants crawling by. Well, he had already killed a patrolling guard, so it would take some time before another one came up to bat. After he confirmed his safety, he silently muttered, "Reinforce." The moment he used his bone reinforcement skill, the skeleton's arm bone flickered with a weak flame and oxidized in the air, followed by a stinging feeling in his left arm. You have reinforced your arm bone. Strength has increased by 1, absorbing a portion of the skeleton soldier's memories and experiences. That spear isn't meant to be swung like that. Look. Though it may look like this is the spear technique that was taught to me by the strongest general of the Empire, General Leo Field. And that was it. All right. He didn't have high expectations from the get-go. On the contrary, he should be happy that his strength permanently increased by 1. He didn't know how long it would continue to increase his stats by 1 whole point, but if he put in the effort, step by step, he should be able to at least confront a skeleton soldier and win easily. Shin Woo did his very best to appease his disappointment, grabbed the spear on one side, and stood up. However, at that very moment, he felt as if something had changed. Did the spear change? No, that wasn't it. He himself had changed. Like he had done thus far, he grabbed the spear without thinking, and at that very moment, he was suddenly overcome with the thought that this wasn't the proper way of wielding a spear. If he wielded it like this, the spear would only be as effective as a club. In order to use a spear like a spear, he would need to hold it properly. He followed his instincts and changed his grip on the spear. Somewhere in that posture lay a similarity to the skeleton soldier's own. Passive skill, beginner spearmanship LV1 has been learned. At that moment, Shin Woo's non-existent eyes widened. He had learned spearmanship from just absorbing the skeleton soldier's memories of handling a spear. If that's the case, if he were to obtain another's bones who learned a different skill, wouldn't that mean that he'd be able to learn that skill as well? His evaluation of the bone reinforcement skill drastically changed for the better. Good, I can accept this. If he had a normal human body, he wouldn't even be able to dream of reinforcing his body through bones. The resurrection through his invisible heart was, of course, the same. These two skills were so powerful that he had no choice but to accept that he was a skeleton. If he had, at first, been like, even so, how could you turn me into a skeleton? You necromancer bitch. Then now he was like, now that it's become like this, I'll become the strongest skeleton. Shin Woo swung the spear a few times and nodded his head in satisfaction. My spearmanship's still lousy, but I can at least stab decently now. He hadn't learned any martial arts before, but he could tell whether his motions were proper or a mess. Since he had swung the spear in the desperate battle to his heart's content, he felt that the force behind his swing was incomparable to before. Over there. Newbie. Yeah, newbie here. Good morning. Of course, Shin Woo wasn't confident that he'd be able to overpower a skeleton soldier in a frontal assault, so he acted like a merry skeleton when a new patrolling guard appeared, and slowly walked towards it. The skeleton soldiers here seemed to really like newbies, as they all greeted him without any suspicions. He was quite thankful for that. Nice to meet you, Paul. My name's not Paul, but it's nice to meet you. The quest comes later. For now, let's not leave this area and grow in strength. He greeted the skeleton soldier, and the tip of his spear flashed, falling diagonally. And thus, the antlion of the external passageway was born. Traitor. It's unfortunate that you couldn't remember your past life, Paul. We were the best of friends. Kuhik. Shin Woo stabbed the skull of the 138th Paul with his bone spear as hard as he could. The thickness and strength of his bone spear was incomparable to normal bone spears, and that bone spear cleanly smashed the skull of the 138th Paul. It left behind a bone spear, as well as 10 perium before disappearing, just like the other Pauls. Oh, this time it's a leg bone. It wasn't like all skeleton soldiers left behind arm bones. After experimenting over 100 times, Shin Woo was able to conclude that they dropped an arm bone, a leg bone, or mixed bones. The description explained that it was a bone of unknown origin. Amongst these, the mixed bones was a dud that didn't increase stats, nor did it contain any skills, while the arm bone increased his proficiency in spearmanship and the leg bone. You have reinforced your leg bone. You have acquired 5% proficiency in the skill, beginner sprint. No, I said now's not the time to be swinging a spear. Goodness, there's really an epidemic coming, I tell you. I'm getting out of here first. Different from you guys, faster than anyone. A nameless soldier? The beginner sprint skill has become LV3. Your sprinting speed has become slightly faster. Nice. They had the effect of bestowing proficiency in the skeleton soldier's sole movement type skill, sprint. This skill allowed for a momentary, lightning-fast sprint, and was a skill that consumed a large amount of stamina, but to the undead which possessed the race characteristic of never tiring, it was a great skill he'd be able to use again immediately after the skill delay. Anyway, my stats didn't increase again. Should I really get going now? Arm bones and legs bones, not mixed bones, would originally increase strength or agility by 1 each time he reinforced them, but at some point, the frequency of that growth had decreased, and now his stats wouldn't rise even after absorbing 10 bones in a row. Though he had wanted to move after raising both his strength and agility to 100. Shin Woo clicked his non-existent tongue and checked his status. Shin Woo. Normal skeleton blessed by God. LV1. Strength 57, Agility 46, Health 34, Magic 6. Passive skills. Invisible Heart LV2, Beginner Spearmanship LV3. Active skills. Bone Reinforcement LV1, Beginner Sprint LV3. They're higher. They're definitely higher, but there were 3 things he wasn't satisfied with. First off, mixed bones weren't effective in improving his stats, which resulted in his health stat being lower than his strength or agility. He also hadn't found a way to increase his magic stat, nor did he know how to use it. Lastly, he was still level 1, despite hunting down so many skeleton soldiers. At this point, I might not be able to increase my level through normal hunting. Certainly, the skeleton soldiers he had killed up until now had been much too strong, despite being level 1, and each skeleton soldier was different from the last. The fact that they were all level 1 was evidence that it wasn't easy leveling up in this world. All the more reason to level up at least once before moving forward, but I suppose it can't be helped. Let's move on to the next step. Since he had moved around the passageway while hunting, he knew the approximate location of the hideout. He had felt an obviously disparate energy leaking from a crack in the corner of the passageway. He was sure, since the skeletons unconsciously avoided it, as they could feel the divine power within. Before that, he had a job to do before he got going. It was to upgrade his bone spear. Would you like to sacrifice the LV1 bone spear to reinforce the LV1 bone spear, +9? Who? When Shin Woo saw the message asking yes or no, he took a short, deep breath. His hands trembled. He couldn't help but do so when he recalled the process of creating the bone spear, +9, as well as the several bone spears that went into making it. That's right. Unlike normal reinforcement, bone equipment reinforcement had a failure rate. Of course, even if the reinforcement were to fail, the performance of the equipment wouldn't drop, nor would it be damaged, but whenever he saw the bone spears disappearing for nothing, his heart would ache. Not that he had one. Reinforce. But what could he do about it? Even though he realized, in his heart, that it'd be more profitable to reinforce his bones rather than the spear at this point, he still couldn't give up. Since this would be the last skeleton soldier he'd kill in the passageway anyway, he would let the spear cleanly oxidize for the last time and burn his own lingering attachment as well. The reinforcement has succeeded. The bone spear has become LV2. Was what he was thinking when the reinforcement succeeded. Moreover, the bone spear had leveled up before him as a result. He might have to call it Lord Bone Spear, rather than Bone Spear now. Ooh! Shin Woo was deeply moved, cried, he couldn't, and observed the reborn LV2 Lord Bone Spear. The spear shaft had become around 30 centimeters longer than before, and the impressive blade gleamed with a menacing light. Bone Spear. LV2. Durability. 500. Attack power. 25 to 45. Ooh. The maximum attack power of the LV1 Bone Spear, +9, had been 30, but a single reinforcement had increased it by 1.5x all at once. Not to mention the increase in durability. As expected, his investment into his weapon had paid off. Shin Woo rubbed his skull against the LV2 Bone Spear's sleek handle, emitting a squeaky sound, and was satisfied. Since he had earned the LV2 Lord Bone Spear, he had nothing to fear anymore. An unforeseen quest has occurred. At that very moment, a quest had occurred. Shin Woo quickly began to resent Lord Bone Spear. Ambush of the Treasure Eater. Among the undead inhabiting the underground empire is a race called the treasure eaters that like to eat objects with magical energy within them. Normally, there isn't anything that piques their interest in the external passageways, but the LV2 item that you have created ended up stimulating one of the treasure eater's senses. It's much stronger than a normal skeleton soldier to the point that it's incomparable, but if you defeat it, you may be able to gain the treasure it has eaten. Quest reward. The treasure eater's treasure? Goo! The moment that quest notification appeared, he heard a shriek from far beyond the passageways. At the same time, he heard something collapsing. There were also a few skeleton soldiers' screams mixed in as well. Qual! The sound was coming closer by the second. A human, no, a skeleton, had just adapted to the situation, yet a new trial appeared as if to interfere with that adaptation. Perhaps that treasure eater didn't appear naturally and had been sent by God herself to torment him? All sorts of doubts momentarily rushed through his mind, but the most important thing right now was deciding his course of action. Shin Woo double-checked the location of the hideout and quickly moved. First, he planned to check the treasure eater with his own two, non-existent, eyes, and fight if it seemed doable. Treasure eater. LV2. Ka-woo! Nope, I gotta run. But when he saw the bug that had broken through the passageway floor, Shin Woo decided to run without hesitation. That thing's the same level as Lord Bone Spear. The moment he decided to flee, he activated his sprint skill and ran towards the hideout. However, at that very moment, he got an announcement out of the blue. Quest failed. However, the minimap has been added as a reward to the unforeseen quest. What? The warm light that leaked between the cracks in the passageway immediately disappeared. The implication was so clear that he wanted to cry. Hideouts could disappear. Shin Woo abruptly stopped and grit his teeth, and soon, the treasure eater had gotten close, greeting him by opening its mouth wide. Kuhawk. Hi, Steve. Kahaik. He did his best to greet it like a cheerful skeleton, but it seemed like it didn't like the name, Steve. Shin Woo shrugged his shoulders and gripped Lord Bone Spear. It was another fight. Kaweek. The treasure eater charged at him with a shriek. Its jagged fence-like teeth within its open mouth radiated with a dull light. Sprint! Kuhia! If he was chewed up by that thing, he knew it wouldn't end with him dying only once or twice, so Shin Woo completely abandoned any thought of a frontal assault. He activated his sprint skill and ran away. Immediately after, the treasure eater brushed past his side and the following wind pressure felt as though a subway train had passed by him, and his bones itched. There was also the foul stench of rotting corpses. Qui! Perhaps it hadn't expected that he'd dodge it so cleanly, and the treasure eater, that had labored in vain, shrieked again and twisted its body around. It seemed like it would take quite a long time for it to make a U-turn, as its body was too large when compared to the width of the passageway. Hup! This was his chance. Shin Woo firmly gripped his spear with both hands and held it to his side. He subsequently pierced through the side of its body, as if he were shooting a cannon, and both of his hands creaked. He placed the full might of all of the stats he had stockpiled thus far into his LV2 bone spear. The force behind the bone spear was truly tremendous. Critical hit. His spearmanship had been firmly tempered through the sacrifice of countless pawls, resulting in a strike both heavy and sharp. The spear entered and split open its side, magnificently bursting open both its skin and the flesh within. It was then that Shin Woo realized that the concept of critical hits existed in this world. Gui! Wo! But he had only thought of attacking with all his might and hadn't considered his next move. The moment the pained treasure eater turned its entire body, Shin Woo failed to pull out the spear and crashed into the wall. Ah! Ah! He was afflicted by a pain that felt as though all his bones were being smashed. The pain was killing him, but he knew he would really die if he lost consciousness here, so he desperately maintained his consciousness. It helped here as well that he was undead. Quihek. TCH, this damned thing. Shin Woo was trapped between the bug's body and the wall. Though he was receiving a shock that felt as though his body was being crushed to pieces, he used all his might, grabbed the spear, and pulled it out, causing dead flesh and blood to burst out. Gui! At that moment, the bug screeched like a pig, filling the passageway with its screams. The treasure eater used Shriek of the Dead. Those exposed to this shriek will momentarily enter a frenzied state. As an effect of Invisible Heart, you ignore the effects of Shriek of the Dead. The effects behind its shriek were ignored due to the effects of Invisible Heart. However, Shin Woo was moving without seeing that message. To be exact, he aimed for the moment it shrieked, as it stopped moving while doing so, to attack the same area he had attacked last time. He believed he'd be able to land another critical hit by attacking the same area. Guak! TCH! However, was he still lacking in skill to intentionally land a critical hit? Although he had thought he had timed it perfectly, his attack missed. Compared to last time, his attack was only able to create a smaller hole. Still, the fact that he could withdraw his spear and retreat immediately following his attack was progress, compared to last time. However, at that moment, a message update appeared. Beginner Spearmanship has become LV4. You can swing your spear more easily now. Ha! Shin Woo briefly voiced out in surprise. That's because Beginner Spearmanship had leveled up to LV3 upon killing the 133rd Paul. It hadn't been long since it had leveled up, yet it had leveled up again, so he couldn't help but be surprised. However, he obviously didn't have the time to look into that right now. Like the message had said, it felt much lighter than before. He gripped his spear and got ready to use his sprint skill again. Guak! The treasure eater had successfully managed to change directions, despite being attacked, and opened its mouth wide, seemingly intent on swallowing both him and the treasure whole. Sprint! Kui! At the end of their split-second battle of wits, Shin Woo dodged its charge again and flung his body. Though it was a dangerous moment that would determine life or death, he was able to dodge its charge with more ease than before. That's because the treasure eater charged in a straight line, and he had used his sprint skill to accelerate at the crucial moment. If he didn't possess a skeleton's body which enabled him to utilize sprint repeatedly, the battle would have already been over. Conversely, it meant that he was confident that he'd be able to keep up with it as long as he wanted. Nice. Then, Shin Woo concluded that he'd need to prolong the fight, so he abandoned all thoughts of attacking, and decided to damage it little by little. He would use the reach of the bone spear at mid-range to nibble away at its body. Eat this! Kuok! The bone spear quickly stabbed its rear end, splattering blood. Shin Woo had successfully attacked, and he immediately retreated to a safe distance and observed the treasure eater. However, its response was strange. Shin Woo had expected that it would go wild like last time, but it ignored his predictions and had curled up as much as possible. Kihei! Arg! It yelled its most annoying and unpleasant shriek to date. Shin Woo grit his teeth to endure its intense, skull-ringing shriek. And there was a truly teeth-gritting scene before his very eyes. The treasure eater uses the roar of healing. The treasure eater's health recovers completely. The wounds that Shin Woo had risked his life to inflict were being healed in real time. Steve, you asshole! Kawoo! It was just an external passageway monster, but it was healing up like a boss monster. He was even more annoyed by the fact that he had no way of figuring out how many times it could use the roar of healing. If it could use the roar of healing repeatedly, then this struggle would be meaningless. Ah, that's so demoralizing. Cool. He felt as though his blood sugar was dropping, but it was just a misunderstanding. After all, he was nothing but bones, so there's no way for his blood sugar to drop. Shin Woo weakly gripped his spear. He could do nothing but act on the assumption that right now, the treasure eater couldn't use its roar of healing indefinitely. And if not, then he'd have to run away no matter what by using sprint. It was then. Monster discovered. During patrol, requesting reinforcements. Ha! Shin Woo couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had definitely heard the voice of a skeleton soldier beyond the completely collapsed passageway. Moreover, thanks to the treasure eater rampaging everywhere, the upper, lower, and side passageways had all collapsed, and the skeleton soldiers were coming out from everywhere. Of course, The treasure eater had absolutely no interest in the soldiers equipped with lousy bone spears, but Shin Woo was different. Are these guys really coming to help me? Requesting additional reinforcements. In the middle of requesting reinforcements, discovered something. Fighting the monster. One of the skeleton soldiers discovered Shin Woo confronting the monster. The skeleton tilted its head when it saw Shin Woo's larger frame. Compared to other skeletons, his body became slightly larger as his stats increased, and the shiny bone spear in his hand, ultimately asking, "Are you a newbie?" "Yeah, I'm a newbie. Help me." Shin Woo yelled distressingly. It seemed like the skeleton couldn't grasp the situation, as it stood there vacantly for a second, but soon came up to the passageway and pointed its spear towards the treasure eater. Participating. Hunting together. Pole. Right after Shin Woo shouted in gratitude, a message appeared before his eyes. You have achieved the feat of deceiving your enemies and manipulating them. Surviving using everything you have may be the most important talent in the Empire. You have learned the passive skill, acting LV1. It felt slightly strange that this was the first skill he had obtained through his own efforts, but he'd use it as much as possible if it would keep him alive. Shin Woo sneakily took a step back from the treasure eater and yelled in an even louder voice. "Pauls, let's beat this monster together. It's a thief that's threatening the security of our empire. Request complete." Participating. Participating. Hey you. Yes you. Come over here. Helping. The newbie. Participating. More skeleton soldiers aggressively participated in the battle, and even those from further away, the more of a fuss he made. There were those who would wait and see, but when Shin Woo personally pointed them out and asked for their help, they couldn't just ignore him. Who would have thought that the first aid training, from the military would help here? Cool. Hunting. The monster. The bug that threatens the Empire. The treasure eater disregarded the skeleton soldiers when more than 10 had gathered and lunged at Shin Woo, but when the number had instantly surpassed 20, it seemed to panic and change its tactics. Kawoo. The treasure eater used Shriek of the Dead. Those exposed to this shriek will momentarily enter a frenzied state. As an effect of Invisible Heart, you ignore the effects of Shriek of the Dead. Ah, I forgot about that. There are a lot of enemies. Where are you aiming? That's an afterimage. Unlike Shin Woo, the other skeletons were powerless before the Shriek of the Dead, and the skeletons that had died from infighting were quickly replaced by new ones. It seemed as though all the skeleton soldiers in the external passageways were gathering here. Kawoo. Kawoo. The treasure eater tried to use the Shriek of the Dead, but it failed due to the lack of mana. Oh, so that's how it is. While the treasure eater tried to repeatedly use its Shriek of the Dead, a message had appeared notifying him that it had failed due to a lack of mana. At this point, it's highly likely that the treasure eater wouldn't be able to use its Roar of Healing either. All of the risk factors had disappeared. Good, Paul. Use the Siege Destruction Formation, 2. Attacking. Killing the enemy. Ah, it's a line he'd wanted to say at least once in his life. Shin Woo was moved, wiping the resulting, non-existent, tears, and then gripped his bone spear. Of course, even if it had depleted all its mana, the treasure eater's physical abilities didn't change and was wiping out the skeleton soldiers with relative ease. It would be easier for Shin Woo if it wiped out a lot of them. Wow, this year's harvest is great. He muttered satisfyingly as he saw the bones scattered around him, then gripped his spear and charged at the treasure eater. The battle ended just 5 minutes later. It was a complete victory. You have defeated a LV2 treasure eater. You have achieved a feat of defeating an enemy with a higher level than you. Your strength and health permanently increase by 2. As a reward for your achievement, the proficiency of your combat-related skills have been increased. The beginner sprint skill has become LV4. Quest complete. Please check the treasure that the treasure eater left behind. You have gained the minimap. If you close your eyes, you will be able to see the minimap. We won. We defeated the monster. I need rest. There were only 2 Pauls, or skeleton soldiers that had survived until the end of the battle. Shin Woo hadn't tried to save them, but they had managed to survive. However, all their bones were cracked in the aftermath of the fierce battle, and it was difficult for them to even stand. Paul, I'll never forget the time we spent together. What are you doing? Kuok. Shin Woo forcefully embraced the two skeletons, who had gone through hardship with him. By doing so, he completely broke through the threshold of their health, and they crumbled to pieces. Silence finally dawned upon the clearing. The passageway had significantly widened and become a clearing that had been filled with the cries of the treasure eater and the rattling sound of skeleton bones. He was the champion. The acting skill has become LV2. That's amazing timing. Phew. I'm dying too. Though he was victorious, Shin Woo had received a lot of physical and mental damage. His bone joints ached, and he even saw a part that was cracked. It hurt so much that he thought it might be better to die once and come back. However, Shin Woo didn't do that. It would be a waste to use his invisible heart like that, and he already knew of a method to restore his bones. That was... Now, let's start reinforcing, shall we? His eyes quickly scanned his surroundings. The bones and the bone spears of the skeletons that had died fighting here were piled in the dozens. There were also dozens of black coins, too. That wasn't all. There was a distinct bone, compared to the skeleton's bones, that remained in the area where the treasure eater had died, as well as something shiny, causing Shin Woo's heart to flutter. It had been worth it to overcome this ordeal, though it was mostly the skeletons. I'll put aside the delicious one for later. He suppressed his desire to check the treasure eater's loot and picked up the nearby skeleton bone first. They were mixed bones, but it was for the better. Increasing his strength or agility through an arm or leg bone had nearly reached its limit, and increasing his health through mixed bones was much more effective right now. You have reinforced your tailbone. Health has increased by 1. Absorbing a portion of the skeleton soldier's memories and experiences. I am pretty sure my tailbone just broke. Really? A nameless soldier? If these guys knew they could leave behind memories of their life, they wouldn't have left behind such useless memories. Shin Woo stroked his tailbone and felt that the cracks had definitely decreased, compared to before the reinforcement. And he repeated the reinforcement process. The more he repeated the reinforcement, the more his stats and skill proficiency would slightly increase, and simultaneously, the cracks on his entire body began to cleanly disappear, as if they had been erased by an eraser. While reinforcing, Shin Woo found an unexpected item. He had picked up a bone that wasn't an arm bone, a leg bone, or mixed bones. Skeleton soldier's rib bone. A bone left behind by a skeleton soldier who had strong bones. So, this kind of thing can happen, too. Was it a rare drop? Shin Woo was slightly excited and sacrificed it to reinforce his ribs. You have reinforced your ribs. Health has increased by 2. Absorbing a portion of the skeleton soldier's memories and experience. General Segald has committed treason? That's not possible. I'll trust him and follow him to the end. A nameless soldier. I don't think that's a line a nameless soldier would say, though. What exactly did General Segald do? He didn't know what he did, but in any case, raising 2 points in health was awesome. He decided to remember the name, General Segald, and absorbed the remaining bones one after another. His appearance was akin to a farmer who was harvesting his crops. Now, it's time to upgrade the bone spear. He looked at the mountain of bone spears that he had collected while absorbing the bones and looked like he was at a loss. It had been so hard to reinforce the LV1 bone spear, so he couldn't imagine how many bone spears would break in the process of reinforcing the LV2 bone spear. Phew. But there's no helping it. I gotta do it. He had realized the importance of weapons several times during his fight with the treasure eater. A single attack from his spear had been more effective than 10 attacks from the other skeleton soldiers. He took a short, deep breath and extended his hand towards the mountain of bone spears. Reinforcement has failed. Reinforcement has failed. Reinforcement has failed. Reinforcement has succeeded. Oh! He had succeeded in only 4 tries. He had thought that LV1 items may be unable to reinforce LV2 items, but Shin Woo became confident after his single success and began to reinforce, one after another. Reinforcement has failed. X30. Please no, don't be like that. No. Reinforcement has failed. Reinforcement has failed. Reinforcement has failed. Reinforcement has succeeded. Reinforcement has succeeded. Bone Spear +3. LV2. Durability 590/590. Attack power 33 to 57. I don't know what the probability is, so I don't know if it went well or not. When he was about to run out of bone spears, the final 2 reinforcements had succeeded, and as a result, the bone spear became a bone spear +3. Shin Woo had quickly used up all the bone spears, and a part of him felt that it had been a waste but decided to be satisfied with the fact that his bone spear had definitely gotten stronger. Now, then, it was finally time for the main dish he had been saving. His bone joints rattled displeasingly as he approached the place where the treasure eater had died. The first thing he saw was a heaping pile of perium. He extended his hand towards the pile, and a message appeared. You have acquired 1,250 perium. Phew. Where exactly was this perium currency used? No, could it even be used? He had picked them up instinctively due to his past game experience, but he couldn't make sense of them. While he was at it, he checked how much money was stored in his pouch. He had gathered 3,340 perium up until now. The money pouch is starting to get heavy. Is there no inventory here? Perhaps he would gain an inventory by completing a quest, like how he had received the minimap. Then, he picked up the treasure eater's bone next. As expected, since the treasure eater was much larger than those pathetic skeleton soldiers, a single one of its bones was larger than Shin Woo. Would you like to reinforce your bones with the treasure eater's lower jawbone? You can reinforce your lower jawbone. This really pisses me off. This probably wasn't even its entire lower jawbone, but just a portion of it. It was the area commonly called the jawbone, and just the thought of sacrificing it to reinforce his bones caused his skin, even though he didn't have any, to feel goosebumps. However, he didn't really have any other choice. He shrugged his shoulders and proceeded with the reinforcement. The bone reinforcement skill has become LV2. The effectiveness of bone absorption increases. You have reinforced your lower jawbone. Strength has increased by 1, health by 1, and magic by 5. Absorbing a portion of the treasure eater's memories and experiences. Kawak. Kahaik. Treasure eater. Shin Woo, who felt the faint memories seep into his body, was briefly silent. He shivered, as the treasure eater's shriek in the message felt slightly, really slightly, affectionate. If he were to somehow meet another treasure eater, he felt as though he'd be able to understand what the treasure eater was saying, albeit a little. In any case, it increased my magic, so let's leave it at that. He might have gained a skill, but most of the memories and experiences he gained through bone reinforcement didn't immediately manifest as skills and would require a bit of time. Most of the time, the skill would only awaken at the right time. If it was a skill though, he'd like to gain that roar of healing for sure. Shin Woo earnestly prayed and extended his hand towards the final item that also doubled as the quest reward. Feather Bone Boots +1. LV2. Durability 256/320. Defense 25 to 35. Options: Agility +5, Sprint Skill +1. Wow! To think, an item could have both stats and skills. This was truly a treasure that was in a completely different league when compared to the similarly leveled LV2 Bone Spear. Shin Woo carefully put the bone boots on his feet. There was a slight problem. Since both Shin Woo and the boots were made of bone, it was difficult to figure out whether the boots were an item or the bones of someone with stupidly large feet. But considering the fact that his body felt lighter when he put the boots on, it was definitely the effect of an item. Shin Woo. Normal skeleton blessed by God. LV1. Strength 65, Agility 55 +5, Health 48, Magic 11. Passive skills: Invisible Heart LV2, Beginner Spearmanship LV4, Acting LV2. Active skills: Bone Reinforcement LV2, Beginner Sprint LV4 +1. Nice. Shin Woo grinned as he looked at his stats. It had certainly changed as a result of the battle. His health, which had been lacking compared to his other stats, had been supplemented to a certain degree, and his magic slightly rose as well. He was sure that he had successfully sublimated the skeleton soldier's battle experience into his own, to a certain degree, in the previous battle. Let's see if I die again. The moment he died in a car accident flashed through his mind. Shin Woo grit his teeth and shook his head, shaking off the memory. He resolved to never die again. Whether this place was a cursed underground empire or the middle of a galactic war, he would survive no matter what. A quest has occurred. The moment he made his vow, a well-timed quest occurred. It was as though God had been listening and decided to intervene at just the right time. Infiltrate the empire. You have remarkably taken down the treasure eater and grown. However, this is still just the external passageways, not the empire. Follow the directions on your minimap, break through the soldiers guarding the empire's walls, and infiltrate the underground empire. Quest rewards. Inventory, use of God's secret shop. Well, then. The tutorial was coming to an end. If I close my eyes. Ooh. When he closed his non-existent eyes, he could see it as an extremely intuitive image. It felt as though there was another eye centered on him that watched from above and scanned the entire area. And within that area, only the correct path shined brightly. Shall I go? There wasn't much more he could gain from staying here. Shin Woo made up his mind, opened his eyes, and started moving along the confirmed path. The clearing had stagnated from silence to dead quiet, and only the sound of his moving footsteps rang out. His footsteps had gotten a lot quieter, perhaps due to the featherbone boots. The passageway was quite long. Various parts of the passageway had collapsed thanks to the treasure eater's rampage. In order to reach those places, Shin Woo had to at times jump high, and at other times jump far. He eventually came to, in a sense, the obvious realization. The sprint skill could be used in tandem with his jump. If I become proficient in my sprint skill, then time it. No, I may become a skeleton who can run in the sky. As he walked through the continuing passageway, the atmosphere in the passageway changed in no time. If it seemed as though he had been reluctantly trudging through the underground passageway, filled with nothing but rocks and sand thus far, then this current area is the first place to have a clear path. This is the real empire. I can see the walls. There was a clear distinction between the external passageways and the genuine underground empire, the castle walls. According to the quest's explanation, he would have to face skeleton soldiers over there again. Honestly, he didn't think he'd lose to a few skeleton soldiers now, but he couldn't release his tension, so long as he couldn't ascertain how many of them there were. Halt! Shin Woo stopped, his bone joints rattling. There was a single, imposing platoon of skeletons atop the castle walls, aiming their bone arrows at him. Yet, their numbers were small. They soon disclosed that reason themselves. The monster. Was it hunted? Yeah, we got it. Though, everyone else died except for me. Now, he could start acting at the flick of a switch. A part of the soldiers that guarded the walls were probably sent to hunt the treasure eater. This all happened because Shin Woo had made a huge fuss. He lauded his foresight, which he hadn't even been aware of, and continued to speak. Paul, please open the castle gate for me. I have to return to guard duty too. Wait. Just a minute. It seemed like this quest would go smoothly. However, had he jinxed it? One of the skeletons wielding a bone bow rattled its teeth as it spoke. I haven't seen that spear before. The treasure hunter dropped it. Shin Woo, who was only focused on entering the empire, roughly concocted a plausible story. But the soldier's response caused his non-existent heart to pound. Then, report it to your superiors. I'll report it. No, wait. He didn't think their military discipline was this strict. Moreover, superiors? Doesn't that mean someone stronger than them will come? He felt pressed and requested. Hey, Paul, wait a sec. I'll give the report myself, so open the gates first. The report comes first. Report then action? Damn it. They hadn't even thought of complimenting and taking care of a comrade who had returned with great difficulty, and instead, would call their superiors when they heard the news that he had picked up a new item. You damn egotistic and ambitious skeletons. I said I'd be the one to report it. Since it came to this, there was no need to hide anymore. If that superior arrived, he'd definitely die at least once. He clicked his tongue and sprinted. The skeleton soldiers were startled and aimed their bone bows at him. Are you revolting against the Empire? Are you trying to embezzle? Is it corruption? 1. Sprint. He completely ignored what the skeletons were saying and jumped while using his sprint and clung to the castle wall. Surprisingly, it was possible for him to jump close to 2 meters high. Even though he was only at the tutorial level, he thought that he had already transcended humanity, and belatedly realized that he was no longer physically human. Attack. Subduing. Subduing. The skeleton soldiers determined that he was their enemy and began to aim and shoot their arrows at him. Though he planned to get hit by a few of them, when the arrows closed in on him, his hand, holding the bone spear, moved by itself. It happened in a split second. Right after he grasped the trajectory of the arrows with the naked eye, he instinctively swung his bone spear and parried 2 arrows. The arrows he couldn't block hit his shoulder, but the damage was minor. You have learned the passive skill, Beginner Weapon Defense LV1. That wasn't all. When he thought he needed to stop the skeletons from drawing their bowstrings again, he naturally opened his mouth and shrieked. Kuwok. You have learned the active skill, Beginner Shriek of the Dead LV1. By using the Shriek of the Dead, the enemies in the entire area have momentarily fallen into a frenzied state. He didn't know how he had learned Beginner Weapon Defense yet, but the source of the Shriek of the Dead was clear. It was the Treasure Eater. He had wanted to learn the Roar of Healing, but the results were contrary to his expectations. You bastards. Just when did you infiltrate? I'll kill you. He felt momentarily dizzy since he had used the Shriek of the Dead with his low mana, but its effects were astounding. The skeleton soldiers treated each other as enemies and started to attack each other. Shin Woo aimed for that opportunity, exerting himself and crawling up the wall. He felt motion sickness due to his unreasonable use of mana, but he grit his teeth and endured. What about that guy? I'm right behind you. By the time the skeleton soldiers escaped the status ailment, Shin Woo was already atop the castle wall. There's no way arrows would be effective at close range. Shin Woo cold-bloodedly swung the LV2 Lord Bone Spear and broke them in a single strike. It was a quick and clean finish. You have hunted a skeleton archer. You have hunted a skeleton archer. For a brief moment, the castle walls regained its silence. Shin Woo grabbed and removed the arrow lodged in his shoulder and sighed. Though he had been slightly injured, he had stopped them from reporting to their sup. The hell is this? After he had climbed atop the castle wall, he was finally able to see the scenery beyond. Since the walls of the castle had remained intact, he had thought that the city within would look like it was from the Middle Ages. But there was a different sight before him, as though it were mocking his naivete. Is this the demon world or something? A city? Perhaps it may have been called that some time ago. However, all the buildings were weathered, decayed, entangled with weeds here and there. It was already ruined, without any proper buildings remaining. The entrance was the only thing barely intact. When he looked further ahead, he saw plains, covered in thick grass, and a sandy desert mixed together conflictingly. If this were like a game, it was as if the developers had tried implementing both a desert map and a plains map at the same time, but the two maps had clashed and failed. What superiors? There's no way there would be any military systems left intact here. The skeletons here were just souls trapped in the past. And those he would have to face from now on were probably the same. Even if he thought he was conversing with them, there was no actual conversation going on at all. Shin Woo suddenly realized what situation he had been dumped into, sighed softly, and shrugged his shoulders. Honestly, before he had come here, when God had told him that she wanted him to purify this place, he felt something like, I don't really care. But if I can come back to life, I might as well. but now he felt like he wanted to fix this place, at least to rid himself of his uneasiness. First, let's pick up the loot. He couldn't just sit thinking forever. Shin Woo collected the scattered perium atop the castle wall, as well as the skeleton archer's bones, bone bows, and bone arrows. Strangely, their finger bones remained, and when he reinforced himself with them, the message was the same among them. You have reinforced your finger bone. Agility has increased by 1. Absorbing a portion of the skeleton archer's memories and experiences. Why are you putting an apple on my head? Wait a second. Fine. I'll learn archery. Geez, I said I'll learn it. A nameless boy, compared to his leg bones, which he had reinforced to the limits and which wouldn't really raise in agility, whenever he reinforced his finger bones, his agility would raise with a high probability. You have acquired a LV1 bone short bow. You have learned beginner archery LV1. That's right, I had expected this too. He searched the entire area and used all the finger bones he found to reinforce himself. As a result, even without the effects of the featherbone boots, his agility had risen to 62, and his beginner archery rose to LV2, even though he hadn't shot a single arrow yet. He continued, combining, reinforcing, the less than 10 bone short bows into one. Bone short bow plus 4. LV1. Durability. 220/220ths. Attack power, 20 to 25. This ain't half bad. Though its attack power was incomparable to the LV2 bone spear, he felt reassured, now that he had acquired a way to attack from a distance. He felt even better since there were almost 200 arrows stored in the castle walls. Quest complete. You have acquired an inventory. You can open and close it by shouting the inventory command. You have acquired a permit to access God's secret shop. You can open it by shouting the shop command. Wow! After he finished collecting the loot, climbed down the walls without much thought, and set foot in the Empire's territory, Shin Woo saw messages in front of him, one after another. He was lost in thought, so he had forgotten that he had been in the middle of a quest, so Shin Woo was briefly surprised, and inwardly cheered. After all, he couldn't carry 200 arrows all at once. Inventory. He muttered, and a checkered, transparent window appeared in front of him that he often saw in games. Shin Woo muttered, saying it was an intuitive inventory, and when he touched the window, his hand was powerlessly sucked in. He was startled and pulled his hand out, but his hand was fine. Will this work? He grabbed a bone arrow and put it inside. The bone arrow was instantly sucked in, and an arrow icon appeared on one of the checkered boxes. The X1 sign next to it was a bonus. Let's see. He shoved all his bone arrows into his inventory. The sign instantly shot up to X189. He wasn't absolutely sure yet, but he felt like he'd be able to stack the same item inside, as long as they were identical. Since the inventory, divided into checkered boxes, currently only had 10 boxes, when he realized that they could stack, he was more than a little relieved. Let's put the bow in. Ah, money too. When he threw the money pouch inside, the pouch disappeared somewhere, and a black coin icon appeared below the inventory, along with the amount 3,420. He honestly wanted to compliment it because of how intuitive it was. Good. Close. However, it didn't close. He thought perhaps it would close if he muttered inventory, and when he did, the inventory completely disappeared. Shin Woo suddenly had an idea and he muttered inventory in his head without saying it out loud. The inventory opened. With this, he'd be able to open and close the inventory amid battle without much difficulty. Then next up. With this, he completely understood the inventory. Shin Woo took a deep breath again and muttered the command of the other reward. Shop. At that moment, the surrounding area distorted. At the same time, even Shin Woo's consciousness became faint. He tried opening his eyes in an attempt to get a hold of himself no matter what, then. Guten Morgen, 2, Mr. Skeleton. He had arrived in God's secret shop. When he came to, he was no longer in the Empire, but somewhere else. It was an enclosed space, with silver walls emitting a delicate light on all 4 sides, and one of those sides was the store. The secret shop permit gave him permission to come to this place. Why are you just staring at me? I'm sorry, but I'm not for sale. Shin Woo tilted his head when he saw the woman behind the counter look back at him with a bewitching smile. Have we met somewhere before? Oh my, are you hitting on me? Unfortunately, your body's not my type. I'm not hitting on you, you know. Even if I were, it wouldn't matter. She spoke while laughing annoyingly, and Shin Woo became short-tempered. He had accepted that he was an undead now, but he needed more time before he accepted his impotence. Even so, the woman, the storekeeper, giggled. Ah yes, you're right. Ah, how sad. The storekeeper was a remarkable beauty with burning red hair. Her red, bobbed hair trailed down to bottom of her neck and slowly shimmered and swayed as if it were actually fire. Yes, Shin Woo had seen that almost living red hair before. He had seen it just recently. Are you God? There's no way God would be that free. Are all people with red hair gods, then? Indeed, she looked different from the God that Shin Woo remembered. By Earth standards, God looked both Eastern and Western, had truly strange physical features, ears, eyes, mouth, and nose, and looked like a 10-year-old girl and a 60-year-old lady at the same time, such that it was difficult to tell. On the other hand, the woman in front of him was different. She looked energetic and in her early 20s and had Western physical features as well. Her hair was shorter, and her red eyes were different from God's. God's eyes glimmered in 5 different colors. But he was sure of one thing: she was an undeniable beauty. That was her only similarity to God. If I were to explain, yes, think of me as a priestess. My role, given to me by God, is to supply my customers, that is, heroes, what they need in return for the proper price. I follow God's orders, so I'm a merchant and a priestess at the same time. If a hero needs something, you should just give it to them for free. Hee hee. She'd probably heard that a lot from the other heroes until now. She narrowed her eyes and explained. You know the term, karma, right? Karma exists in everything in this world. When you are accomplishing a special feat, perfecting a special skill, or even killing others, you gain karma. Then are levels and stats a kind of karma, too. It's nice that you catch on quick. You're right, they are a type of karma. And customer, by using that karma as a price, you're able to receive a different karma in return. The karma I receive in return for my items is Parium. The explanation was long, but it just meant that achievements, skill training, and killing would allow him to raise his level and stats, and that the parium he received from killing monsters could be used to buy items. When Shin Woo heard that parium was also a type of karma, he took out a portion of his karma from his inventory and looked at it thoroughly, but as expected, he couldn't figure anything out. It seemed as though the woman was used to it, and continued. Customer, you don't have the ability to process or use it in another place yet. It will be much more helpful to you if you just buy items from me. Then, one more question. You said that levels are also a type of karma, but why haven't I leveled up yet when I've killed so many monsters? The merchant's smile thickened. Levels were a number that represented one's league and was also this world's standard of absolute strength. Shin Woo mentioned it so casually, so she pitied him. I don't know what levels you're talking about, but levels in this world aren't something that can be raised that easily. You have to gather an appropriate level of karma to level up. And the most typical example of that karma are stats, then to become level 2. All your stats combined must become 200, solely from your body, excluding all items or temporary buffs. It's easy to understand, isn't it? 200? How and when am I supposed to get that much, is what he wanted to say, but when he added up all his stats, he was already at 186. That meant that he could raise his level when he raised his stats by 14 more. But you don't need to be in such a rush to level up. You see, what you did to get to that level is just as important as the level up itself. Whether it's by a special feat or a skill, other types of karma are important as well. Well, you'll see once you've experienced it yourself. It seems like level ups aren't simply a change in number in this world. That means that it might mean a job change? In any case, it would happen soon, So just like the merchant said, he'd find out for sure once he experienced it himself. He was briefly lost in thought, and the merchant tapped the counter to snap him out of it. I think I've explained enough, back to the point that I should receive karma in exchange for goods. Would you like to buy something now, customer? What do you sell? I sell everything, aside from what I don't have. First off, potions. He really didn't feel like he needed potions, setting aside whether a skeleton could even drink a potion or not. That's because his injuries could be healed through bone reinforcement. Next are magic books. Magic books, huh? Perhaps he might need them later, but not now. He didn't even have enough mana for the Shriek of the Dead, and he could only use it once, so what would he do by learning magic? If he hadn't learned the Shriek of the Dead, he might have thought about it, but since he already had a skill that could turn the tides of battle, it didn't really feel very appealing to him right now. But you won't be able to buy them right now since you don't have enough perium. Of course, we also have equipment that you can wear. Equipment, huh? As I thought, I'd really like to see TH. And finally we have bones. Bones. Shin Woo, who was about to buy equipment, stopped moving and talking at once without hesitation. They sold bones? What if he was right, and they were the bones he was thinking about? He wondered why they sold such a thing, and he tilted his head, while the merchant's expression remained calm. There are bones scattered around the empire, so there's no way our shop wouldn't sell them. The other heroes don't have a bone reinforcement skill, so they would mostly sell them to me at a cheap price. Of course. Since he didn't really have anything worth selling right now, this didn't mean anything to him right now, but it would change in the future. He had an inventory that could store pretty much anything now. Shin Woo decided that he'd pick up stuff he didn't immediately need in the future and nodded his head. And he told her the type of item he wanted. Please show me the bones. I knew you'd say that, customer, so I had them prepared. He pondered between the equipment and the bones, but most of his strength came from his bone reinforcement skill, so he went with the bones. He simply thought that bones were, of course, better since they'd permanently increase his abilities, rather than equipment which he would have to change eventually. But it was mostly due to his experience with bone reinforcement, and the variety of abilities he could gain from it. There's, of course, the possibility of gaining skills, but I can't deny that the original owner's memories within the bones are greatly affecting my combat abilities. Shin Woo knew well. The reason he, who hadn't learnt any martial arts on Earth, could get this far and put up a decent fight against the Treasure Eater was because he had indirectly gained the combat experience from absorbing the skeleton soldier's bones. The true ability of bone reinforcement wasn't just the increase in stats or the acquisition of skills. It was inheriting the innate experiences and memories that only others had. If he continued to gather these, it would eventually become his strength, and no one else's, that would surpass everyone. Oh my, customer! You have 3,420 perium on you right now. I honestly didn't have any expectations, but you came with quite a lot, didn't you? Let's see. A bone that you could buy with that much money. Here, you can buy one of these too. Huh? The merchant took out 2 pieces of bone and placed them on the counter, though he didn't know where she had taken them out from. Both of them were large, so he couldn't even guess what part they came from. One of them was slightly dyed red, and the other was dyed blue. When he saw the 2 bones, Shin Woo couldn't help but retort. The Matrix? You won't wake up from a dream just because you choose the red bone. After all, this is reality. No, wait. Can't I just buy a lot of bones? I want to acquire as many experiences as possible. You can only buy 1 bone with the money you have. Our shop doesn't sell level 1 monster bones. I won't stop you from buying bones cheaper than these 2, but you'll regret it. Ultimately, it seemed like he had no choice but to pick one of the 2 bones. If so, he wanted to at least get the most information possible before buying, but she firmly shook her head. Item information is also karma. Customer, you don't have enough perium to get information on these bones, and buy them. Eek. At this point, this woman didn't seem like a priestess who helped heroes under God's orders, but a scammer instead, but it didn't seem like she'd give him the information on the bones no matter what he did. If both bones cost the same, then their potential should be the same as well. If so, of the two, which is more expensive? The blue one's a bit more expensive. It costs 3,350 perium. He would only be left with 71 perium once he bought it. It would be irreversible, regardless of his choice. He nodded stiffly. Please give me that one. A manly choice. Here you go. The perium disappeared from his inventory, without him needing to pass her the money. When he saw the blue bone replace the money in his inventory, Shin Woo felt somewhat relieved. Then, the merchant clapped her hands. Now, it's time to part ways. If you work hard on quests, you'll probably see me again soon. I'll tell you one thing, you just made a very good decision, customer. Since the base is important, the base. Then, I'll see you next time. She said grinningly, and though he was incredibly confused, she smiled beautifully and clapped her hands again. At that moment, the space surrounding Shin Woo instantly broke down, and he was returned to the place he was before entering the shop. To be honest, he was a bit disappointed. These past few days, he hadn't been able to have a proper conversation with someone else. Regardless of how similar she looked to that cheeky god, just the fact that he was able to have a conversation with her was a huge comfort to him. Only after that thought did Shin Woo realize that he was starved of human contact. No. Don't be negative. The only thing that could push Shin Woo forward right now was positivity. If he wasn't positive, he wouldn't be able to do anything. He shook his head so much that his neck joint creaked, and then took the bone out of his inventory. Bone reinforcement. Would you like to use bone to reinforce your own bones? You can reinforce your skull. He had a good feeling about this. It was his first time reinforcing his head, but he felt like it wasn't a part that he could reinforce very easily. All right, reinforce. He proceeded with the reinforcement without hesitation, and then, the blue bone in his hand disappeared without a trace. Simultaneously, he felt a dull shock to his head. You have reinforced your skull. Magic has increased by 7. You have gained a portion of memories and experiences. I can't understand you people. This research will lead us to ruin. Closing square bracket. When a portion of the memories of the original owner of the bone flowed into his head, he understood the base that the merchant had told him about. He didn't know about Earth, but it was the ability to wield the energy that was at the base of all existence in this world. You have gained the passive skill, Beginner Magic Affinity LV1. Magic recovery rate increases. After Shin Woo had barely overcome the migraine, he blankly raised his head and looked at the world. He had thought there was only death in this world, but there was something that remained that still harbored life. It was mana. Chapter 3. Level up. It's a good view. Shin Woo carelessly muttered. Although he was underground, mana was everywhere, and harmoniously floated about. Shin Woo stretched his bare hand, and the mana briefly remained at his fingertips, and then went somewhere else. It seemed it was because his beginner magic affinity was still only level 1. Getting this skill early on was definitely a good call. He stayed there, playing with the mana a bit more, and then withdrew his hand and nodded his head. After experiencing the mystery of mana, he finally felt like he was in a different world. He had felt, how should he say it, that it was just a survival game up until now. If the blue bone was this effective, then what would the red bone do? It feels like the red bone would have been really helpful. I can't ignore perium anymore. Oh. A quest has occurred. He wasn't that surprised this time seeing the quest message. Before the message appeared, he saw the mana in front of him distort, and not only that, he had predicted that it would appear at around this timing. The ability to survive here. Though you have safely infiltrated the Empire, you are still too weak. The underground Empire is vast, and there are powerful undead who have lived a long time within. However, there are fortunately some who evaded the undead curse and continued to live. These living beings inhabit an isolated environment, the dungeon. You must first build up your strength in the dungeon before you start your battle with the undead in earnest. Pick a dungeon nearby and get to level 2. When the sum of your stats reaches 200, the karma that you've gathered up to that point will determine your future appearance and potential. However, be cautious. The dungeon itself is safe from the curse, but those who were cursed and entered into the dungeon are not. Quest reward. Open Hero's chatting channel. What? After he read the entire quest, Shin Woo's eyes glared. A chatting channel? It would have been nice if they'd opened the chatting channel earlier. If not, is this karma too? If that's also not it, is getting to level 2 the prerequisite to entering the chatting room? Let's go now. Right now. The dungeon's location is being shown on the minimap. However, contrary to his massive complaining, he immediately nodded his head and accepted the quest. He had been lonely since he hadn't had anyone to talk to, but a channel where he could talk to the other heroes inside the Empire? He would be lying if he said he wasn't happy. Furthermore, realistically speaking, this chatting channel would be helpful. The heroes agreed that their mission was to save the Empire. Then that meant they were on the same page. Shin Woo hoped that the heroes deep within the Empire would each say a word or two to their junior. No, wait. I might be thinking too optimistically since I've been starved of human contact, but, in any case, I'll know when the channel's open. As long as he behaved himself, Shin Woo would be able to use this chatting channel effectively. He was extremely satisfied with the quest reward, nodded his head, and finally noticed the last phrase of the quest. However, be cautious. The dungeon itself is safe from the curse, but those who were cursed and entered into the dungeon are not. He tilted his head. The monsters inside the dungeon aren't affected by the curse, but the heroes who had entered the Empire have already been affected by it, so be cautious if you don't want to die, is that it? He was an undead that was blessed with immortality, so he didn't really worry about it too much. Alright, let's find a suitable dungeon nearby. Shin Woo leaned against a nearby building's wall and concealed himself. Then, he gently closed his eyes and saw the minimap. Things like the monsters' locations didn't appear on the minimap, but aside from that, it showed the surrounding area in fair detail. Shin Woo tended to not have a good sense of direction, so showing the surrounding area would give him a solid sense of direction. There are 3 shining points above the minimap. Their size is subtly different. Does the difficulty correspond with the size? There were 3 dungeons in the immediate vicinity. Right now, he couldn't tell what kind of monsters were in a certain dungeon, nor could he tell their difficulty level. He wouldn't know until he personally entered the dungeon. If that's the case, picking any of them should be fine. Shin Woo started to walk towards the closest dungeon. First, he needed to get out of the ruined city. Then he would need to go past the desert terrain, which was all he saw, to reach his destination. The surrounding area should be safe, since those skeletons just stayed atop the castle wall. Of course, he couldn't afford to be careless. After all, a treasure eater had appeared in the external passageways, which could be considered the tutorial stage, just because a LV2 item had appeared. Shin Woo still wasn't confident that he could beat a treasure eater one-on-one with ease. The wall called levels was huge and sturdy. However, it would change soon. As long as he raised his stats by 9, that is. First, let's be cautious of our surroundings. He had been afraid of the Empire ever since he saw the quest alert window, and he had comparatively been recklessly charging forward until now. Even so, Shin Woo had no choice but to be on his guard. He couldn't afford to be reckless, even when taking on level 1 skeletons as his opponents. However, fortunately, his concerns were unfounded. He hadn't encountered a single zombie or skeleton before reaching the dungeon that hid on the outskirts of the ruined city. It's strange though. Since he hadn't encountered anything, he was even more concerned. How could there be fewer skeletons within the Empire than the skeletons guarding the external passageways? To him, who had prepared for a much more dangerous fight with the treasure eater, he felt all his energy drain away. Perhaps it's a matter related to the dungeon. He didn't ignore this sense of disharmony. He returned his bow that he had taken out to intercept enemies from a far distance and tightly gripping the bone spear. Then, he cautiously moved forward, being watchful of his surroundings. His level 4 beginner spearmanship would be better than his level 2 beginner archery against a strong opponent. More importantly, his bone spear was at level 2. He felt more reassured when he held the spear than the bow. He recollected his faint experience in the army, and instinctively guarded in all directions poorly, and after a while of walking tactically, he finally arrived at the point that shimmered on his minimap. The problem was that it kept shining. I arrived, but... So where exactly is the dungeon? Do I have to dig into the ground or something? The dungeon entrance was so well hidden that if the dungeon's location hadn't appeared on the minimap, Shin Woo wouldn't have been able to recognize it. He couldn't find it by looking at the ground, and it was a structure where he would find the stairway that led underground only after digging for quite a while, but honestly, there was a secret that was hidden here. And before he went through the effort of digging, Shin Woo, fortunately, realized that. What's this pattern? There was a pattern on the ground that faintly emitted light. Shin Woo scrutinized it for a while and realized that the pattern didn't actually exist but was a trace of mana that had become fixed, albeit faintly. This does look like the dungeon's entrance. What do I have to do for the mana to, ooh? The moment Shin Woo's bare bone came into contact with the trace of mana, the magic circle that blocked the dungeon's entrance responded to Shin Woo and started to strongly surge up. Shin Woo instinctually directed the mana that was gathered in his bone and touched it. Then, it seemed as though a light more powerful than the pattern was emitted, and Shin Woo absorbed it. At the same time, Shin Woo saw a series of texts in front of him, like when he saw his status or quests. Level 1 Dungeon. You have received a permit to enter the rural rat nest. All of your stats increase by 10 in the dungeon. Info on the dungeon is added to your minimap. All your actions in the dungeon are buffed. Beginner magic affinity has become LV2. Magic recovery rate increases. The pattern on the floor naturally shut off, and the stairway that led underground appeared. If he hadn't learned beginner magic affinity, he probably wouldn't have had to dig into the ground until he found the stairs. He also wouldn't have known that the dungeon was level 1, that his stats would be increased in the dungeon, or that he'd be buffed inside the dungeon. Shin Woo suddenly self-praised his choice, though it was more like a gamble than a choice, and went down the stairs into the dungeon. Kwang. The surroundings gradually got darker, and while going down the top of the stairway, suddenly the ceiling made a sound as it closed, and pieces of rock fell down in a flurry. If he were still human, he would have said it was dirty and freaked out, but after becoming a skeleton, he didn't need to wash up. It was fine as long as he didn't take a lot of damage. I don't need to eat, don't need to bathe, and I don't even need to sleep. I might even have the greatest advantage in roaming around this undead nest. Just considering the fact that he was thinking so strategically about his undead situation meant that his thought process was already far different than when he was still human, but he wasn't self-aware of this. He was just curious when this stairway would end and busily moved his feet. But in the midst of that, his tension and his wariness helped to keep him from foolishly losing his life. Kuhat. The incident happened in a split second. Finally, at the end of the ladder, he saw a stone floor exposed underneath, and while he was going down the ladder 2 steps at a time due to his excitement, suddenly, a bright light attacked him from within the darkness. It was extremely fast and at the same time, powerful. Shin Woo instinctually used sprint and tried avoiding it, but despite that, the elbow of his arm not holding the spear starting from the bottom was completely severed. Joyuk. Even though he had changed into an undead, he retained his sense of pain. The pain he received was naturally awfully huge. Still, Shin Woo suppressed his desire to roll on the floor and raised his spear. He couldn't even tell where his opponent was, so getting angry at his injury was just a luxury right now. I was careless. I thought that the dungeon entrance would be okay. No, that wasn't it. He had put up his guard. His opponent was just too fast, and he just couldn't evade it. Even right now. Q-hack. By the time he had seen a glimmering light in the darkness, it was already too late. Shin Woo hunched down without thinking the instant he felt goosebumps on his entire body. Something passed over his head, possessing both destructive force and speed. Beginner sprint has become LV5. Shit. After he had barely dodged his enemy's attack, he grit his teeth and stabbed his spear forward. Until now, he had always thrust with the strength of both arms, but now, since he was gripping it with one arm, the force behind it wasn't like it was before. Kawak! Damn it! His enemy couldn't dodge his quick counterattack, and his spear did indeed pierce its flesh, but he could tell that it wasn't a fatal blow from the blunt feeling that was relayed from the spear. He withdrew his spear, desperately retreated back and grit his teeth. Kuhak! Why you? It was at that moment. He didn't know where exactly his enemy was, but after it yelled out a strange sound, the torches on the walls that no one knew about were lit in order and the whole area was slightly illuminated. Shin Woo was finally able to see what his opponent looked like. Guwa. It had rotting, decaying clothes, and similarly dressed down and dirty. There were cracks here and there on its body, and contrastingly, it wielded a long sword that gleamed silver. That was definitely a zombie. An undead. Shin Woo didn't think an undead would appear, yet one had appeared at the starting entrance. He didn't know what to think and momentarily stiffened. That was his mistake. Gwa! His opponent's rotten eyeballs rolled, and it advanced towards him, swinging its sword. Shin Woo instantly lost his head. It was an absurdly nimble and sharp strike. You bastard! Shin Woo had been reduced to a head and rolled through the air. As he did so, the damn zombie that had killed him didn't stop looking at him until the end. He had vowed to never die again, and it felt unfair that he had lost one of his lives so futilely. They said that undead wouldn't appear in this dungeon, but the fact that an undead had suddenly appeared from the start pissed him off. At that time, Invisible Heart has become LV3. All stats increase by 3. 97 levels remaining until the max level. At the same time as he saw the message, he was familiar with it since he had seen it once. Your total stat count is above 200. Would you like to receive level 2's karma? It is also possible to put it off briefly. You have encountered an undead hero, LV2. If you succeed in giving the undead hero peace, you will inherit the opponent's parium that he gathered until his death, as well as a permit for God's secret shop. His eyes were filled with the appearances of strange messages. An undead hero. Damn it, that's what it was talking about. Only after reading the message did Shin Woo barely understand the meaning behind the message when the quest occurred. The message: the dungeon itself is safe from the curse, but those who were cursed and entered the dungeon are not. Wasn't talking about Shin Woo, but of those who may have gone into the dungeon before him and had become undead. It's level 2 and it's a hero too. So, if the other heroes die, they really are mercilessly turned into the undead. Right now, he wasn't even concerned about the reward for taking down the undead hero. That's because he was instead thinking of how much parium it had gathered before dying, and what he could buy with that money in the secret shop. But if there was something that concerned him, it was that the effect of Invisible Heart had increased all his stats by 3, and his total stats broke through the 200 mark. He wondered whether he should accept the level up or not. I'm strangely torn. Common sense dictated that he should immediately nod his head and level up. Though the enemy who lopped off his head was a zombie, it was still a level 2 hero, and if he wanted to kill it easily, he should also be at level 2. However, there was something that bothered him. It was the message stating that he could briefly postpone his decision. Why? Why would they need to ask that now? If he was only allowed one choice, telling him that he shouldn't proceed with that choice had absolutely no meaning. If that's not the case, then, do you perhaps get something for postponing your level up? Shin Woo violently rolled his head as he saw the zombie hero confirm his death, return his sword, and turn around. What could be the reason for postponing a level up? And what would change as a result? Kuhik. Kayahat. While he pondered this, the zombie hero hobbled away, slowly returning back to where it came from. When he looked at the zombie hero's body, he noticed that it was badly damaged. Its entire body had slash marks, as well as traces of bite marks. Its neck was especially damaged, as more than half had been cut off and the neck bone was struggling to keep the shoulder and neck together. Then, when he saw the wound, Shin Woo was sure. He would postpone his level up to 2 and knew what he had to do, what he could do. No, he didn't need any more excuses. That's just what he wanted to do right now. It was a desperate revenge. Your advancement to level 2 is briefly on hold. Your body is reviving. For now, he steeled himself and quickly proceeded with his resurrection. Even his once lost arm was completely restored, and Shin Woo lightly retrieved the bone spear that was rolling on the floor, and he silently, extremely silently stood up. The zombie didn't think that the skeleton it had just taken down had a resurrection skill, so it kept walking slowly. Hup! Die! Shin Woo only properly aimed for the zombie's neck, and forcefully took a step forward, simultaneously gripping his spear and strongly pierced forward. His stats were buffed by the dungeon, so his spear contained a force that he hadn't had just yesterday. Critical hit. You have learned the passive skill, Beginner Critical Hit LV1. It will become easier to ascertain your opponent's weak points, and you can land a fatal blow. Kayak. Its sharp scream screeched like a drill, and echoed throughout the clearing. His attack had definitely hit the mark, and he had succeeded in shattering more than half of the zombie's neck bone. As expected, he had a chance, even at level 1. Plus, his attack just now had caused him to learn the critical hit skill, so it was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Kick! Kihawk! How dare you! Kayak! The zombie hero was extremely agitated, turned around, and attempted to slash him with its sword, but Shin Woo pulled the spear lodged in its neck with all his might and cried out a shriek that wouldn't lose to the zombies. He had used his soul skill that utilized mana, the Shriek of the Dead. By using the Shriek of the Dead, the enemies in the entire area have momentarily fallen into a frenzied state. Shriek of the Dead has become LV2. The instant it heard his shriek, the trajectory of the zombie's sword stab greatly shook. Shin Woo used that opportunity to safely pull out his spear and retreat. However, his non-existent eyes were filled with unpleasant messages compared to when he had swung his spear and slashed the zombie's neck. The enemy resists the status ailment. It was unable to completely resist the effects, but it has recovered its reduced accuracy rate. Kuwok! You piece of! The zombie had immediately regained its form and its sword was approaching quickly. Before it was too late, Shin Woo grasped its sword's trajectory and raised his spear, using his beginner weapon defense. However, Quajik! Breaking sound! Ha! Its quickly approaching sword had broken his spear into pieces, the bone spear that was level 2 and had been reinforced 3 times, +3. Its force truly felt akin to lightning. However, despite the crazy situation, Shin Woo frantically suppressed his unrest and stabbed with a part of the split bone spear, shoving it into the zombie's neck. The zombie screamed and retreated. You piece of shit! Kawak! He hurriedly picked up the remaining half of the splintered bone spear. However, because of the bone spear lodged in its neck, the zombie was worked up and attacked. Fortunately, the force behind its sword swing was definitely weaker than before. The damage it had sustained was critical. The moment they clashed, Shin Woo solely trusted in his instincts and used his sprint skill, throwing his body at the zombie, and the zombie's sword dangerously grazed the small of his back. A savage breaking sound passed by him, and Shin Woo nimbly uprighted his body, and before the zombie could take a stance, he thrust the remaining bone spear piece in his hand into its neck. Critical hit! Kuhak! Kuwak! It had definitely hit the mark. Moreover, the unstable neck had 2 thick spears lodged into it, so the zombie couldn't even move, and merely floundered its hands around. The problem was that the sword within those floundering hands had a destructive power that couldn't be ignored and that it was cutting through the air. No matter how he thought about it, the zombie's strength mostly came from its weapon, not its physical abilities. If not, there was no way that it would be able to easily cut through a level 2 weapon as if it were a straw. Since he knew how frightening the zombie's sword was, Shin Woo didn't hastily approach, and instead, stayed back safely, and took out his bow and some arrows from his inventory. Although his beginner archery was only level 2, there was no way he'd miss at this distance. He notched an arrow on the bowstring, carefully aimed for its head, and fired. Guak! It hit the mark. Of course, even with a headshot, a level 1 weapon wasn't capable of inflicting a fatal wound. Though the kinetic energy from the arrow unleashed a force that violently shook the zombie's head, and as a result, it only received an intense shock, rather than damaging its unstable neck. Here, have some more. He shot another, and then one more. Its neck extended and sagged and was accompanied by the sound of flesh tearing. Its sword, which continuously cut through the air, had momentarily stopped. Despite that, Shin Woo didn't let down his guard, and once again notched an arrow, pulling the bowstring with all his strength, and let go. Critical hit. The beginner critical hit skill has become LV2. Kek. The zombie muttered something, and the moment it took a step forward, its neck bone let out a horrifying breaking sound and broke. It couldn't bear its weight, so the head completely tore off and rolled onto the floor. Shin Woo forcefully stepped on its head, which had rolled up to his foot, without hesitation. That was the moment his vengeance was complete, and simultaneously, the moment his level up began. You have defeated a LV2 zombie hero. You have achieved a feat of defeating an enemy with a higher level than you. Agility and magic permanently increase by 2. You have acquired a permit to access God's secret shop. You have acquired 2,280 parium. You did not submit to defeat and succeeded in your revenge. Now, it is time for you to receive your karma. LV2 Feather Bone Boots, +1, Broken LV2 Bone Spear, +3, and the LV2 Zombie Hero's arm bones are absorbed through bone reinforcement. The beginner sprint skill has become LV7. Strength has increases by 5, agility by 10, health by 5, and magic by 15. Absorbing a portion of the zombie hero's memories and experiences. You have learned the passive skill, Beginner Swordsmanship LV1. You have learned the passive skill, Low Rank Bursting Thunder. Beginner Spearmanship, LV4, Beginner Swordsmanship, LV1, Beginner Weapon Defense, LV1, and Beginner Critical Hit, LV2, have been absorbed into Bursting Thunder. You have acquired 17% proficiency in Low Rank Bursting Thunder. You have achieved a feat of acquiring a low rank skill. Magic increases by 5. The Bone Reinforcement skill has become LV3. The skill effectiveness increases. The instant his level increased, despite him not activating his bone reinforcement, the bones rolling around everywhere gleamed and disappeared. The energy within the bones was absorbed into him. Even the feather bone boots he was wearing. Fortunately, he was able to receive all the abilities within still intact. My head hurts. At the same time, memories were engraved in his head, overloading it. The zombie hero's memories had obviously increased his level, and its knowledge of this world instantly flowed into him. Shin Woo suppressed his desire to lose consciousness by gritting his teeth and organized and accepted the flowing knowledge as calmly as possible. His body made a dreary sound as well, and was changing in real time. However, because he had such a large headache, he didn't really feel the pain from the evolution of his physical body. His feeble bones became thicker, and the shape of his bones looked more suited for combat, as well as more durable. Compared to his body, his excessively large skull had reduced in size and became sturdier, while the skeleton which didn't have any dirt on it became slightly murky. Meanwhile, a brand was engraved on his forehead, emitting a faint red light. Right now, Shin Woo thought the word meant Avenger, though he had no way of knowing. It was proof that his decision to defer his level up and prioritize taking down the zombie was the correct choice. You have become level 2. The effectiveness of your stats increases. Your inventory increases by 10 boxes. Due to your achievement, you have gained the ability of an Avenger. You have learned the passive skill, Beginner Avenger LV1. How much time had passed since that message had appeared? He had frantically organized his brain, and while he accumulated the knowledge, as well as the information, his front was filled with messages. For the first time, Shin Woo realized that the pain that afflicted his body and mind had gone away. He had gotten a hold of himself, surveyed his surroundings, and then took a sigh of relief. Despite the commotion, no monsters had appeared. Perhaps the zombie hero he had fought had killed all the living beings in the dungeon. Then, where? Too many things had changed all at once. He needed to more precisely understand the dungeon, if for no other reason than to explore the dungeon. Shin Woo briefly took a deep breath and muttered status. Shin Woo, Skeleton Avenger blessed by God. LV2, status effectiveness 110%. Strength 73 plus 10, agility 77 plus 10, health 61 plus 10, magic 43 plus 10, while the dungeon bonuses still apply. Passive skills: Invisible Heart LV3, Acting LV2, Beginner Avenger LV1, Low Rank Bursting Thunder LV1, Beginner Archery LV2, Beginner Magic Affinity LV2. Active skills: Bone Reinforcement LV3, Beginner Sprint LV7, Beginner Shriek of the Dead LV2. And then he suddenly realized that defeating the Treasure Eater or the zombie hero had been a miracle. Shin Woo checked his status and couldn't hide his astonishment at all. It's not just a simple increase in stats, but it increases the effectiveness of my stats by 10%? So that's why there's such an obvious, overwhelming divide between level 1 and level 2. If this kind of calculation is applied going forward, there'll be an even larger difference from level 2 to level 3, and level 3 to level 4. His eyes looked dazed just imagining it. He realized that he still had a long way to go. If he had known this information beforehand, he wouldn't have even thought about fighting the zombie hero. The only reason he could even win against it was because the damage to its body had been so severe. He had been extremely lucky. Strength 73 plus 10, agility 77 plus 10, health 61 plus 10, magic 43 plus 10, while the dungeon bonuses still apply. The power of the level itself was amazing, but his stats, which had absorbed the bone spear, the feather bone boots, and the bones that the zombie hero had left behind, were also quite impressive. Due to his stat bonus from dying, as well as the effect of his achievement, bone reinforcement had resulted in an inflation of his stats. Losing the LV2 bone spear was regrettable, to the point of tears, but it had caused him to grow since it had been broken anyway. Then how about, I have 2 new skills, huh? When he leveled up, he had acquired the skill, Avenger, and a skill from the zombie hero's memory, Bursting Thunder. Because they had such grandiose names, Shin Woo was concerned that they might be all looks and no substance, but it was just an absurd misunderstanding. Beginner Avenger LV1, passive. Once you harbor a grudge on someone, they cannot escape. You will be buffed if you run from the battlefield, and you can find the opponent who defeated you on the minimap. When you fight that opponent again, all your abilities will increase by 20%. Every time your revenge is successful, the skill grows. He gained the Avenger skill on the premise that he'll lose. It was definitely a great skill. However, it seemed like a strange skill that wouldn't have much opportunity for growth, so he was slightly lost in disappointment. But when Shin Woo understood the meaning behind, "You will be buffed if you run from the battlefield," he came to his senses. Does it mean that it's okay to run away for the purpose of revenge? If that's the case, then dying in battle isn't the only thing considered a defeat. It might not be such a simple skill as I had first thought. True, if defeat only came at the hands of a lost battle, then there would obviously be no point to this skill since not everyone has a resurrection skill. The method of using the Avenger skill was different from the other skills he had gained thus far and was caused by the effect of his actions. The potential growth of this skill depended on how he used it. Of course, there was still stuff he didn't know about the skill, so recognizing that there was potential in the skill was the best he could do for now. Bursting Thunder LV1, passive, a close combat fighting style that was created by a legendary hero. After it was enhanced by God's power, this skill was born. As the greatest fighting style that includes all close combat techniques and defensive techniques that originate from unarmed combat, its power and speed are akin to exploding lightning and fatal. In order to properly demonstrate that strength, the techniques are naturally clad in magic, but this is not possible at the current level. On the other hand, contrary to Avenger, Bursting Thunder was an incredibly intuitive ability. For some reason, he was able to naturally understand why spearmanship, swordsmanship, even weapon defense, and critical hit were absorbed in the process of gaining the skill. It was a technique that included all close combat techniques. He didn't really need to say how amazing it was. It wasn't a technique that he could gain anywhere. By absorbing the bone that the zombie hero left behind, he had extracted the memories and experiences within. If it hadn't been for bone reinforcement, for a legendary hero's ability to be enhanced by God's power, there's no way that a LV2 hero could have created it himself, so he likely asked for this skill from God. When he thought about it like that, he felt like he'd scored. He'd be able to gain the abilities that God had given to the other heroes because of bone reinforcement. He had once again realized that the bone reinforcement skill's potential was unlimited. More importantly, it was amazing that the bursting thunder skill was at the low rank level. This was the first low rank skill he'd obtained, and considering his achievements, he was sure that it was a high rank skill, rather than low rank. Then, lastly, let's take a look at the sword the zombie left behind. Honestly, when he defeated the zombie hero, he was most excited about acquiring its sword, not the level up, nor the acquisition of skills. Regardless of how experienced it was in bursting thunder, splitting a level 2 bone spear in a single strike was evidence that its weapon's ability was uncommon. It's over here. Since the zombie hero had already disappeared and was gone, it was easy to find the sword that was rolling on the ground. The sword gleamed in a blue light within the darkness and looked truly mysterious, so his anticipation continued to rise. However, the moment Shin Woo excitedly grabbed the sword, something strange happened. The sword, which had definitely been made of metal, emitted a cracking sound and started to change. Through the power of bone reinforcement, all weapons that you gain change into bone. LV 4 feet thunder lasting has changed into LV 3 feet bone of thunder lasting. The weapon completely transformed the moment he touched it, and it became really short. The bone blade radiated a delicate blue light, and the hilt became discolored, transforming into a black bone. Bone? No, he ignored the impossibility of metal transforming into bone for now. How could a level 4 item instantly degrade into a level 3 item? What a waste! He thought everything would be good, but he didn't know that bone reinforcement would have such a fatal flaw. Until now, all the items he had acquired were made of bone, so he hadn't been aware of it at all. Shin Woo was momentarily lost in a state of listlessness. If he was holding a level 4 weapon right now, he would have felt invincible. No, wait. Damn it, get a hold of yourself. I should have expected this kind of demerit. Moreover, it would have always been a demerit. Since bone reinforcement would change all the weapons he acquired, he'd be able to use the weapons he wouldn't otherwise be able to use. However, if he looked at the long term, it would definitely be an advantage. He had no choice but to think that way for now. Tears flowed from his eyes, though they really didn't, and he checked the status of the weapon that changed to bone. Bone of Thunder lasting. LV3. Durability. 750/750ths. Attack power. 100 to 120. Options. Strength +5. Agility +5. Increases effectiveness of bursting thunder +10%. He probably got this from God, too. The abilities of the hero he had just defeated were lousy, whereas the latent potential of the bursting thunder skill was ridiculous. Not only that, its weapon was also closely related to the skill. In other words, it was likely that the hero, in exchange for being dispatched to this world, asked God to give it a skill and a weapon. When he compared them to the abilities he'd gained, they seemed inferior, and aside from bursting thunder, there was a high possibility that the hero had gained other abilities, but he could care less since he didn't gain those abilities. It's definitely advantageous to have a high-level weapon at the start, but this is the result. That was the only thing worth complimenting, that the hero had given to his junior. But he'd probably forget about it soon. Despite the weapon degrading to level 3, the Bone of Thunder lasting boasted strength that completely outstripped the bone spear. He tried swinging it around, and finally sighed, ridding himself of the regret of not obtaining a level 4 weapon. It was at that moment. Quest complete. The chatting channel is opening. Mr. Shin Woo is entering. Lloyd HK. Hey, what's this? A newbie came in? Sarah von Rettedane. Hello, Mr. Shin Woo. It should have been a hard decision to become a hero, so thank you for your bravery. Let's work hard in the future. Prince Altania. Anyway, what level are you, newbie? 5? 4? You're not level 3, are you? Please tell me you're not. Lloyd HK. He could start at level 3 and grow. Why are you discouraging someone who just came in? Prince Altania. Damn it. That's because if you finish the start at level 3, even if you desperately try to earn Parium, the limit's level 5. Do you know how many I've seen die like that? Lloyd HK. But I started at level 3 and now I'm level 6. Prince Altania. You're talented. As soon as the chatting channel was opened, a few people hectically chattered away. It was called a chatting channel, but it was more like a group chat, so it was noisy hearing so many voices in his ear simultaneously. Despite that, he was so happy that he could hear other people talk that tears threatened to flow. To the point that he somewhat regretted that he didn't have eyes from which tears could flow. Shin Woo, it's nice to meet you, seniors. Please take care of me. The moment the chatting channel opened, he instinctively understood how to use the channel and gently bent his left pinky finger and spoke. He spoke both reasonably and calmly, to the point where it was difficult to believe that he had become a skeleton. No wait, a skeleton talking was strange from the start. Lloyd HK. Considering how courteous the newbie is, he'd get along well with Redidane. Sarah von Redidane. It's really nice to meet you. You're still in the outer area, right? If you find something troublesome, please tell me at any time. Lloyd HK. C. Shino Rendu, 1. So what level are you? Should I give you some Parium? Shin Woo. I'm sorry, but why does my level or Parium matter? Shin Woo decided to ask what he was most curious about first. He thought that by diligently killing monsters and stockpiling stats through bone reinforcement he would get karma. However, his senior heroes were synonymous regarding Parium and levels, so he couldn't help but be curious. Shino Rendu. What? Are you kidding me? Lloyd HK. Shino. If he came out of the secret shop only buying equipment, he might not know yet. Shino Rendu. Ah, is that possible? True. That's the time when you're most clueless. Sorry, newbie. I lost a comrade just a little while ago, so I'm a bit touchy. Shin Woo. That's all right, I understand, senior. I was short-sighted. It seems that there are items in the secret shop that correspond to level. As Shin Woo talked through the chatting channel, he felt a strange feeling. His personality was calmer than before, and he spoke respectfully. It felt like he had two personalities. It felt like he was wearing a mask. Ah, he was using his acting skill. Shino Rendu. Fortunately, your brain's not bad. Yeah, that's it. Sarah von Redidane. That's the significance of the secret shop. You hunt the undead flooding from within the Empire, acquire Parium, and then go to the secret shop to purchase a medicine that increases your stats. Through that, we surpass our limits and are then able to do a more difficult area. At the same time, the purification of the Empire progresses. It's fine, even if your level is a bit low. Since God's secret shop makes it possible for infinite growth potential, Lloyd HK. The higher your level, the more expensive the medicine costs. Do you know how much it costs to buy a single health drug? 300,000 Parium, damn it. It'd probably be faster to achieve a feat and increase my stats that way. Shino Rendu. But achieving a feat ain't easy. Alfie wanted to do that and overtaxed himself. Ha! Shin Woo was moved once he heard a senior hero lament. He was suddenly sure that his request to God wasn't wrong. Of course, he knew that they all didn't have a special characteristic like bone reinforcement, but he didn't know that they had to go through so much trouble just to level up. If they had to go through this much trouble, then it was worthwhile becoming bald and impotent. Probably. Please. Prince Altania. While we're on the topic, what level are you right now? Redidane. Sarah von Redidane. Isn't Mr. Shin Woo more important than me right now? Prince Altania. You're avoiding it again. So, newbie, what's your level? Shin Woo was briefly silent. He had just learned new information and suddenly realized how amazing his ability was, so his mind had become busy. However, if he was sure of one thing, it was that he didn't really need to tell them that he was level 2 and cause them to despair. There was the difference between the level they would accept and the level he would accept, and in their eyes, his growth rate would seem excessively fast in the future. Shin Woo, I'm level 4. Lloyd HK, niece. If you're level 4, then there's still hope in this world. Sarah von Rededane, that's a relief. Then it seems like you won't hopelessly die in the outskirts. Shino Rendu, not bad. Hey, after you've properly armed yourself, make sure you get the medicine. Increasing your level should be your priority over everything else, your level. You already know, right? Since he knew they would respond like this, he exaggerated quite a lot. He didn't even know how much he had to raise his stats to get to level 4, but he went with it for now. They had responded in the way he had expected. Prince Altania. Still, you're not very strong, so you probably received a special feature based on your characteristics. What did you get? You didn't ask for something like increasing your level, shooting fire, or asking for a sword, right? Please tell me you didn't. The abilities one receives when they cross over to Heiguroa depends on how strong they were originally. Normally, in a fantasy world, a strong person would comparatively get weaker abilities, while a normal civilian from Earth like Shin Woo would receive the greatest of abilities. That bastard prince was asking about that right now. Shin Woo, I got a skill. Prince Altania, good job. Seriously, good job. Lloyd HK, your base is good. If he does well, he should become strong. Sarah von Rededane, you did well. None of the skills that God grants are normal. Yes. How can we help Mr. Shin Woo right now? Lloyd HK, newbie, tell us about your current situation. Since we'll do what we can to help you. Fortunately, his seniors seemed mostly amicable. He didn't know how many of his senior heroes were in the Empire, but he was slightly relieved and replied. Shin Woo, I'm alright for now. If I get into a tough situation, could I please count on your advice then? Lloyd HK. Hey, you can speak a bit more comfortably. Yasunori Akira. It's been a while since we've seen a guy with some common sense. If you can safely get to the capital, I'll put you in my party then. Lloyd HK. Akira, you're still not dead. Yasunori Akira. You idiot, don't call me by my name. Even by his standards, he was extremely polite to the point he felt goosebumps. However, Shin Woo was definitely weaker than his seniors right now, so he decided that he needed to thoroughly bow his head for now. Plus, he's a skeleton right now. There was nothing wrong with always being careful, regardless of who he was dealing with. Prince Altania. Yeah, when the time comes, I'll give you some advice. Think of it as an honor. Sarah von Rededane. If you always keep the chatting channel open, you won't be able to focus on the current situation, Mr. Shin Woo. Please keep that in mind. I'll be praying for you to safely arrive at the capital. Shin Woo. Thank you for the advice. Then, I'll see you later. Shin Woo politely said his goodbyes and closed the chatting channel. He could no longer hear the voices that had pounded in his ears, and it felt lonely, but still, he had found a place where he could chatter whenever he wanted, so he was delighted. From now on, he felt sure that he'd be able to cope with this world. Anyway, since a quest isn't coming up, it's telling me to do as I please for now. It worked out well. Since he decided to clear the dungeon to adapt to his body, which had advanced to level 2, as well as his new skill and weapon. Of course, gaining Parium and Bones was his highest priority. Then. Shall we go? He sighed satisfyingly and took a step forward into the dungeon. In order to completely adapt to this world, he moved his skeleton body.